Okay, so the next step then is to take our ML model which we've integrated into ADS and actually incorporate that within a top-level decision-making process, a decision model. So if I go back to our project, we've got no decision models right now, so I'll create a new one. I'll call this drug selector. And this is what we're going to expose to the outside world. So I'm going to define the input parameters like gender, blood pressure, etc. And I'll do that now. So gender. And we'll call this one BP. This one will be BMI. And this is a number. And finally we have age, which is an integer. Okay, so these are the input parameters for our decision service, and these parameters are going to flow into this decision node. Now what I'm going to do in this decision node is actually convert these simple parameters into our composite parameter, which is the patient data type. So I'm going to change the output type to be our patient data. Remember, we defined these when we were integrating the ML model. And we'll call this decision node something meaningful. Let's call this patient details. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is execute the actual model. So to do that, I'm going to create a new decision node, and I'm going to connect this in here. So the patient details will flow into this decision node that's actually going to do the model execution. So I'll call this node execute model, and the output type of this decision node will be the predictive model result, which we defined before. Now I'm going to connect the predictive model to this. You can see here it's appeared here, and I can select which predictive model I want to use. We've only defined the one, and ADS will generate the vocabulary phrase I need to actually execute the model. This is a bit of a mouthful, but I didn't name it to make it look nice in the rules. It was named to be clear, so bit of a mouthful, but that's fine. So in the execute model node, I can now create a logic node, sorry, a rule, and I'll call this use P3 for female over 75. Okay. So, first of all, I'm going to paste in that vocabulary fragment I had from before, and into the placeholder all I need to do is select the patient details. So this variable here, patient details, is the variable that we output from this decision node. So we had the primitive input types, they were converted into a patient data type called patient details. It's now flowing into here and is available within the rules, and it's called patient details. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of logic around that to reflect the intent behind the rule, and that will say something like if the gender of the patient details is F for female, and the age patient details is more than 75. Then okay, so that's going to use that P3 model if the patient is female and the age is over 75. I suppose what we could say here is else let's set the prediction to be, let's say that will be drug Z. And we'll set the probability to 0. Okay, so when ADS executes this rule, it's going to say if the gender of the patient is F and the age of the patient is more than 75, then it will set the decision to the output of this predictive model that we imported, passing in patient details as the variable to the decision service that we processed before. Otherwise, we're going to set the prediction to Z and the probability to 0. And finally, I'm going to add an output node which will simply output the drug type as a string. And I want this to be the output node, and the logic in there will simply say map output and set the decision to the prediction from this execute model node. That should do. Okay, let's just remind ourselves of this logic. So we're only going to use the predictive model for females over 75. So if I create a test case now, let's say this is a female, low blood pressure, BMI of 25, and their age is 77, and run that. We can see, looking at the details that have been inferred as the decision has been processed, we passed in this female age 77. We can see that the execute model stage used this rule, and we can see from the probability that it must have called the P3 model, and we can see that that prediction of B has then been propagated through to the final output node, which is drug type. If we were to change this, let's say change this to males, so run this again, we can see that the rules have opted not to use the predictive model, and we're using the default value of drug Z with a probability of 0. So we're just starting to use our ML model within the rules. This is a good start, but in the next video I'll show how we can select alternative models based on patient characteristics. We'll also check the confidence of the prediction with a guardrail rule.